Well, I'm very happy to be here. In January this year, I went to my board and I said, we're going to go against the trend. We're going to raise 500 million at a 10 billion valuation. And they all said, times are over, Julian. You're not going to get it done. Last year, we raised 600 million at a 3 billion valuation. And I went out, and actually 2 weeks later, I had a term sheet for 500 million at a 7 billion valuation. That was February, March, right? So kind of downturn really starting already. We were obviously super happy. And then 2 days before the signature, it was an American crossover. They pulled the term sheet. And then within 2 weeks, I had to get a round together. And in the end, we raised 400 at a 4.5, which is still an up round from last year. And looking back, I'm really happy about it. Because I think being overvalued, being valued as in the last year's paradigm, is actually a disadvantage. And now we're on a much more healthy basis for the times to come. So my session today will be around mainly practical lessons for CEOs in 3 areas. One is hiring, one is scaling, one is management, so kind of my lessons from the last 10 years. How applicable they are for the next 10 years, I don't know, and how relevant they are for each one of you, I don't know, but I'm just going to share my learnings. In each one of these buckets, 3 learnings. And then I have an extra, which is 3 learnings and tips for the crisis. So just a little bit about wefox. We started 2015. We are now around 1,300 people. We are now around 600 million in revenues. And what we do is we sell insurance products, personal lines, via human advisors, so not direct. So we have around 3,000 salespeople in Europe. And the good risk we put on our own balance sheet, so we have a licensed insurer. And all of the rest, we have more than 100 partners we insure the risk with. For the customer, it's a 360-degree coverage of all insurance products in your life. All right, let's start with the first bucket, which is hiring. And the first learning in the bucket of hiring is basically take your time, right? So in the last 10 years, the amount of times I was pressured into making a decision, pressured into saying yes to a candidate because the recruiter said this candidate will be gone, or the candidate themselves pressured because they had to make a decision, led so many times to making a wrong call for a management team member. And my first learning is really take your time. There's a lot of mothers with beautiful daughters out there. You don't need to rush into a decision when it comes to hiring. The second big learning in that space is trust your gut. So especially in insurance, right? It's an old school industry. These guys come to the top, they become CEOs of huge companies, 20, 30,000 people, just by talking really well. Because in insurance, what you typically see, and I don't know how it's in your industries, is results come years later. So as a talker, you can actually become the #1 in a multinational insurance company, lead thousands of people. So they're great at talking, they check all of the boxes, but every time I look back with failed hires on a senior level, there was this gut feeling I had that something was off, despite every single one of my team members saying, go for it, and every single box was checked. So I made this rule for myself, if I have this gut feeling, and by the way, I'm not sure if you know, we have access to 2/8 of the information consciously. 6/8 is unconscious. We are like a big data algorithm, and we need to trust our gut much, much more. So my rule and lesson is trust your gut when making hiring decisions. If something feels off, don't go for it. And the third one is a lesson I had to learn, which is ending with pain is much better than pain without ending. Like, I fall in love with people so fast. And for me, I build a really deep personal relationship with the people that work with me. And I believe in the potential of every human to achieve unbelievable things, of unlimited potential. That I'm sure of, and nobody will convince me otherwise. Yet, it takes a lot of resources and time and willingness of the other person. So what I've learned is that if things don't work, just end it. And don't try and try and try and try to somehow make it work. It hurts, but it's better. All right, let's go to the next bucket, which is scaling a business. Scaling a business from 0 to 100, scaling a business from 100 to 500 employees, scaling a business from 500 to 1,500, and so forth. So the first one is, and I don't think this has changed in today's macro, and that's also what we heard before, early stage is about growth, right? So the first lesson is build big-ass sandcastles. So when you're asked to build a sandcastle, you have two choices. Either you go and build a sandcastle, or you go and pile a lot of sand. So the person that has built a sandcastle is done pretty fast and says, look at this beautiful sandcastle, look at all of these nice details. And the guy building the pile, has just an ugly pile. But the guy with the pile says, listen, your sandcastle will be destroyed by the first wave. My sandcastle is built on a huge substance and will be a long-lasting, sustainable sandcastle. So when we started in 2015, there were literally tens of thousands of insurtechs. It was a hype. Now we are the #1 in the world. So thousands and thousands of companies have just died because they built beautiful little sandcastles that were destroyed because they never reached the scale. So I don't think this one changes. I think build bigger sandcastles. Go for it. The second in scaling is, and I don't know how relevant it is for all of you, but it's a really relevant lesson for me, is when you go in a board meeting and all of your board members are investors, it's like a pitch for the next investment round. You cannot get real advice. You cannot truly be honest. It's like a complete conflict of interest. So I would have wished much earlier to get independent people into my board that are not investors, that are not big shareholders, and that have gone through the same challenges as I have, and that give me real, honest advice. I hated these pitching sessions in my board. That's not what a board is for. That's a dysfunctional board. And then scaling. Culture is the most important in scaling. And culture cannot be delegated. So you as a CEO, you are the culture. And you cannot hide. You need as many touch points with the people as possible. And you need not to become tired of telling the same story over and over and over again. So now we're 1,300 people, and I travel to all of the locations constantly, and I just meet with random people I've never seen in my life before, and I just tell them the story, and I try to build relation and connection. One thing I do always is, so we still hire like 50 to 80 people a month, and every time they come together, every month I do a 2 to 3 hour session to introduce them to the wefox story. And that's like a firework, right? And a firework is great, but it needs to become a long-lasting fire. So you need to find ways on how to continuously be with the people and repeat the story. Okay, management. Third bucket. First learning is trust is all you need. So it's really just about the trust you have to your employees and vice versa. And the way I do it is I have a coaching session once a week and once a month a whole day. And what I typically do is I go to the whiteboard and I write down all of my direct reports and I write down what's the trust and alignment level I have at this point in time with every single one of my direct reports on a scale from 0 to 10. And the two lowest we typically talk about. What is it that I can change in order to increase trust? What is it that I can change in order to increase alignment? And then we go into a one-on-one, sometimes with a coach, and we really work deep on our misunderstandings, on the different perceptions we have. What is the reason for different views on topics? Sometimes we take a day, sometimes we take 2 days. Because trust is all that matters. In the beginning, it's a relationship between two people. And it's about really appreciating each other for who they are. That is the foundation. And if you have this trust, then you can talk about factual things. And if you can talk about factual things, then you can talk about development. But what typically happens is we're missing the trust. We talk about factual things, and we get into defense and we fight. Rewind, go back to 0. Work on the trust. The next one on management is personal growth as a constant. Your company is a plant. And this plant wants to grow to become a big tree, a sequoia tree. And what's keeping the company from growing to how big it could grow is you. You, as a CEO, you're the cage around the plant. And some people are very talented, some CEOs are very talented. They start with a big cage. But you, as a CEO, you need to increase the size of the cage. The cage is your personal limitations, your weaknesses, your unconscious bias. And if you don't work on eliminating your unconscious bias, your limiting beliefs, you keep your company hostage. You keep your company from growing. And that's the same for every team leader and their team. And that's why, as a leader, it's important to go where it hurts. Humans love to stay in their comfort zone. And then what typically happens is we get cognitive dissonances. So some things that happen around us that don't really fit into the view of our world. And what we typically do is we neglect them. We go away. Great leaders approach them. They make it their daily task to approach uncomfortable feelings, to approach insecurities and vulnerabilities. That's what great leaders do. And then great leaders tackle the topic and try to understand, why does it make me feel insecure? Why do I feel vulnerable? And then they go through the process of understanding the reason. And this usually means it's pain, it's frustration, it's depression. But you get through this valley and you get to another step. And when you're through this, you look back at where you were, your comfort zone, you're like, I never ever want to go back. You all know what I'm talking about. Great leaders need to increase the cage because they need to go through this process. They need to make it their number one job to go through this process like a machine. Look for uncomfortable situations, approach them, go through the process. Look for uncomfortable, approach them, go through the process. Just one example. If you, for example, don't like conflict and escape conflict in your day-to-day job all the time, this will send a signal to the entire company, and your entire company will not go into conflict. And productive conflict is very important to resolve issues. And you take the entire company hostage. You keep it from growing. Okay, the third one in terms of management is enjoy not to be needed. You know, this is a really difficult one because as a CEO, or generally, we all have huge egos, right? And these egos are oftentimes fueled by people calling us wanting our advice. We want to be needed, right? But imagine being a football coach, and the only way you can get your team to win is in the 80th minute, always put yourself on the field yourself to shoot the goal. That's not sustainable. So every time you as a CEO, you are actually needed. You need to do something that no one else in the organization does. And that's, of course, different from stage to stage. But at my stage, and maybe half the size of my company, something goes wrong. And you need to find someone that takes care of this. And you need to enjoy not to be needed. Very important. Okay, and now 3 extra tips for the crisis. So the first one, and these are just my thoughts right now, how I'm approaching the crisis, okay? So don't take me for granted. But one of the things I've been thinking about is I've had this pretty big management team. And I'm a huge advocate for diversity. And you know that diversity is difficult, right? Because people come with different perspectives, and conversations and decisions take a lot longer. But you're looking at it from all different angles. I came to the conclusion that in times of crisis, like we're going to see in the next 12 to 24 months, I actually need a team that understands each other blindly. And we need 10 seconds to make a decision because we're all on the same line. We need to be decision machines. And we need to be super aligned to the company. So what I did is I reduced my management team from 9 people to 5 people. And I said, and I feel much more comfortable now with having very short meetings, very precise. It's not the time for long philosophical discussions. It's not the time for thinking about a decision 10 times and turning yourself in circles. It's the time to decide on a path and go all in. So build one team. Then the second one is, you know, ideas don't matter, right? And VCs know that, especially in early. Like if I invest, I don't care about the idea. All I care about is this like a big market? Okay, good. Because all that matters is the CEO and their founders. And their resilience and so there's only one reason why companies fail. Just one reason. The CEO gives up. Because there's always a way to save the company. There's always a way out. Also in a crisis. And now is the time to pivot. Now is the time to see how the market changes and be the fastest in adapting. Crisis in Chinese means danger and opportunity. In Greek, it means to separate from the rest. Now is your opportunity to build something big. And then the last one is just focus on building a good business. The last few years, we got blinded by the hype. There are these businesses that have scaled to billions in revenues, but they're also burning billions of dollars. And if I ask the founder, and I asked them, how are you ever going to get to profitability? They said, I didn't even think about that. That's a signal of complete perversion. So that's why what we are doing now is healthy. So build good businesses. We're seeing 290 billion of dry powder. The LPs are not going to default. What we're seeing right now is if you have a crash and you crash against a wall, you first have to kind of orientate yourself. All right, are my legs broken? What's happening? So you slow down a bit, right? That's what's happening right now. But the patient is fine. It's going to get up and going to continue invest, but not in these crazy things. Good businesses that make money. Right? Okay, that's it. Thank you.